Hi, and welcome to Common Denominator, straight up conversations with me, Moshe Popack. Each week I chat with pioneers, innovators, and truly inspirational people to learn the steps they take to turn their ideas into reality. My goal is to empower you to dive in, be bold, and take profound steps toward realizing your own potential. Joining me this week is Kramer. And if that name sounds familiar, it's because he is the inspiration behind Cramer from Seinfeld, one of the most iconic television characters of all time. Kenny will tell us about how he became immortalized and how he parlayed that into a bus tour, multiple TV gigs, and a mayoral run. Get ready to laugh with the original K-Man. Next.
This is Common Denominator, straight up conversations with Moshe Popack. Now, here's Moshe.
Hey, Kenny, welcome to the show. So take us back to life before Seinfeld. I guess you're living next door to Larry David.
Okay, well, Larry David was living next door to me. I got the apartment, so I think that's a fair way to describe it.
Sure.
But there's a lot of life before Seinfeld. I got to tell you that Seinfeld life only is a tiny little bit of the 70 some odd years that I've existed. But yep, that's true. Larry was across the hall. Yep. And one day he came into my apartment and said, "Hey, Cramer, Seinfeld just asked me to help him write a pilot. I got an idea. I think I want to base a character on you, and I'm going to call him Kramer." He said, "Well, that's very clever of you." He says, "Are you okay with it?" And I said, "Well, of course I'm okay with it, as long as I get to play Kramer." He said, "You can't be Kramer." So what do you mean I can't be Kramer? I am Kramer. But you don't understand. They're going to want to hire an actor with a lot of credits who lives in L.A. probably. You can't be Kramer, I'm sure of that. And I said, "Okay, I can live with that. Go ahead, write your pilot. Good luck." And, of course, they went back across the hall. Jerry came over, and the two of them spent about maybe 2 weeks in that apartment across the hall, and they banged out a script for a pilot. They went out to L.A. and they did the pilot episode, and, well, the rest is a lot of history, you know.
So when they chose Michael Richards to play you, right, the original Kramer, right, to play you, what do you think about that choice? What was your thoughts on that?
Well, I was a little put out by like how wacky he was. The amazing thing is, Michael is a brilliant physical comedian. He's brilliant. Like when you see him walk into a room or have a tantrum or whatever, all that stuff is choreographed. He spends hours and hours trying to figure out how to have a spasm. So the character was pretty one-dimensional, like zany. I didn't view myself as that, but then when they gave him the Kavorka, the sex appeal that makes nuns leave the order to be with him, I was kind of flattered by that. But Michael's choice, when they started doing the show, they used to tell him, tone it down, tone it down. They were always giving him notes, tone it down. And of course, he wouldn't listen to their notes. He just did what he wanted to do. And thankfully, it's a good thing that he did, because that character and the way Michael portrayed him became like just an international icon. When he knew he was going to play a character based on Larry's next door neighbor, Kramer, he chose like not to do any kind of research. He didn't want to know anything about me. So he wanted to create his own thing, and he did, and it sort of worked out okay.
What would you say was kind of the best storyline for you, the best one or two storylines that you can relate to the most from the show?
There were a lot of great storylines. I mean, but I want to go back a little bit with you. We were talking about the length of the show and the run of the show. There was a lot of luck involved. And the backstory is that Seinfeld was, when it first aired, NBC didn't know what to do with it. They moved it around. The first place it sat was opposite Home Improvement, which was the number one comedy television. And so naturally, it wasn't getting ratings. And of course, these network suits, they go by ratings. That's what matters, the ratings.
Sure.
And it just wasn't getting ratings. And then a fluke happened. Ted Danson, who had a show called Cheers, had a contract with NBC that as long as he produces episodes of Cheers, it's his production company, the show could have the time slot that follows Seinfeld. Seinfeld could be their lead-in. So what happened was when Ted Danson decided that he's going to not do any more episodes of Cheers, NBC lost. They did not lost the rights. They had the right to put whatever followed Cheers that they wanted. They figured, let's throw Seinfeld in there and see what happens. Well, within 2 or 3 episodes in, Seinfeld is now getting better numbers than Cheers, and the whole audience that was busy watching Home Improvement just kind of switched, went to Seinfeld, and then that's when it took off. When the NBC suits discovered that Seinfeld can beat Cheers, they said, "Whoa, of course, we always knew this was a great show. There's no question about it." So they took the credit.
It's so counterintuitive, right? The show about nothing. It's like, right? And the name of our podcast, right? Common Denominator. Like, what does the humans have in common? And I love slapping comedy on that. So I really relate to that idea, right? And look how popular, right?
You're not the only one.
I know, obviously. Any of the shows really correlate your personal life? Certain character traits, let's say that the Kramer
storylines took out of episodes and adventures that took place in our lives when we lived across the hall from each other. You know, because I in the beginning when the show was on the air, you know, Larry used to tell me what he was working on and what stories he's doing. Hey, Kramer, what do you think about this? And when the show reached like an apex of popularity, I said, Larry, do me a favor. Don't tell me anything else about what's, because I want to watch it for the first time, you know, the way an audience does, and have the pleasure and the excitement of seeing it for the first time. So, but I used to admire all the time. I was, you know, damn, Larry, he must have taken notes when he was living across the hall. Although he's got quite a memory. But so a number of things that happened became episodes in Seinfeld. But at least not episodes, full episodes, but storylines, you know.
By the way, I was just curious, how did Larry meet Jerry?
The stand-up community of New York, they were both comedians that were, you know, finding their way. And you know, back then in the 70s, there were like 3 comedy rooms in New York. There was the Catch a Rising Star, the Improv, and the Comic Strip. And in those, you know, the comedy community all played those places. Those were the 3 major ones, you know. And Larry and Jerry both were in that circuit. And, you know, they became friendly, and they used to get together and, you know, work on each other's material, give each other ideas. So they had known each other at least 7, 8 years before Jerry was approached about doing a pilot. Jerry was far more successful than Larry. On the other hand, Larry was doing okay. He left New York to move to LA to be part of a TV series that was called Friday, which was like a complete ripoff of Saturday Night Live. The difference is live from New York, it's Saturday night. It was live from Los Angeles, it's Fridays. So he retired, and he became a writer and an actor on that show. That show was on for 2 seasons. When it ended, Larry returned to New York. He got a job as a writer on Saturday Night Live. In fact, one of the funniest episodes of Seinfeld is when George quits his job as a real estate guy. That actually happened. That happened to Larry. Lorne Michaels hired Larry to be on the show. And Lorne decided that he was going to take off some time and go on a sabbatical, and he brought in an executive producer to run the show for him. Larry hated this guy. The guy had no taste and funny, and yet he was in charge of like one of the best shows on television. And Larry was so upset because he didn't get any sketches, and none of his sketches got on the air. And then finally he wrote a sketch that they had, it made it to dress rehearsal, and it got great laughs. And 5 minutes before airtime, I can't tell you the producer's name, but his initials are Dick Ebersol. He came and told him that we had to cut your sketch. Larry got crazy. How dare you? You have a sense of humor up your ass.
Classic, right? Classic Larry David. Yeah.
That's it. I've had it with you. I'm out of here. I quit. And he stormed out of there. So now I'm home. It's midnight. And usually when there's a live episode of Saturday Night Live going on, Larry, you know, the writers will stay there through the episode. And like at 12 o'clock, Larry comes through my door. I said, "What are you doing here? The show's on." He said, "Yeah, I know. Kramer, I can't believe what I did. I just told Dick Ebersol to go And on my way home now, he says, I was just figuring how much money I just gave up. Because he was getting like 10 grand an episode to write the show. I just gave up enough money that I could live comfortably for the next 3 years. He was so distraught. And I said, calm down, Larry. You have a heart attack. Here's what you're going to do. Go back on Monday morning and pretend like nothing happened. You sit at your desk and you start writing. And of course, he ended up finishing the season. But when George tried that in an episode of Seinfeld, he cursed out his bosses. That's it, I quit. And then he shows up at work the next Monday and they say, what are you doing here? You quit. So it didn't work so. But
That's hilarious. So I know as the success of the show continued, you did Kramer's reality tour. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, that was an episode also. Well, when the show got to the fourth or fifth season, it's so popular. This character Cramer is like the biggest next door neighbor in the history of television. And I figured, if I don't cash in on this, I'm an idiot. I put together I was going to sell a DVD called Kramer's New York, which had, Kramer knows where to go to get the happy hour food, where to get to the movies for nothing, how to go see shows, knows all the ins and outs. And at that time, CD-ROM was a big platform, that people were buying CD-ROMs. And so I wrote this treatment, a pitch for a CD-ROM called Kramer's New York, the ins and outs of New York, how to survive and thrive, just on your wits. And I wrote a pretty good proposal, and I took it around to, at the time, the big publishing houses was opening up their electronic publishing divisions. It was a whole new industry. And I went to a couple of these big major publishing companies, and I pitched them my idea. And the response that I got was that basically what I was offering was a database. That's it. To have a hit CD-ROM, like selling 1 million copies, you have to have a game or some entertainment content. So I thought, what entertainment content? What could I do? Let me think about that. And I lived at the time on an apartment faced 42nd Street. And I was thinking about what entertainment content. And a gray line sightseeing bus passed under my window. I said, wait a minute, a Seinfeld reality check. I'm going to make it a tour, a Seinfeld tour. And so I got together with a friend of mine, a very talented comedian named Bobby Allen Brooks. And we sat down and we mapped out a route that the bus could go down. And we put together a show. And then I got really, really lucky because I had rented a theater. And I rented the bus. How do I sell tickets to this thing?
I think in some the idea was to go to all the sites from the show throughout New York City. Was that basically the idea?
Tell the stories behind the stories.
The stories behind the stories is beautiful. Yeah.
Start off with an hour of stand-up in the theater where I tell a bunch of funny stories about things that happened in real life and how they became episodes. And then we board this bus, and I take them around to all the sites. The highlight, of course, is stopping at the Soup Nazi for soup. And it turned out to be wildly successful. Again, it was luck was involved in that. About a year before this happened, the tour happened, I'm in Florida on a holiday, and I check my machine for messages, and there's a message from a guy named John Tierney. Hi, this is John Tierney of the New York Times. I'm doing a story about Seinfeld, and I wonder if you would care to comment on it. And I was in Florida on vacation, and I wrote down his number. He left his number. I had it on this legal pad. And then when I got back to New York, I forgot. I put it in my pocket, and I forgot all about it. When I get back to New York, I unpack, and I take my hand out of my pocket, and I see this John Tierney, New York Times. So I just took a pin and stuck it into my bulletin board. Because at the time, people were coming to me about Seinfeld, but they wanted to know what's going on with Jerry and Shoshone. At the time, he was dating a high school senior. He was in his early 40s.
Sure.
But big scandal. But I didn't want to be involved in that, so I just never bothered to make any phone calls. So now I'm back in New York. It's a year later. I got to sell tickets to the show that's starting on January 27th, 1996. And I look on my bulletin board and I see this John Tierney, New York Times. I said, oh, maybe John Chaney of the New York Times would be interested in Kramer's reality tour. So I pick up the phone, I dial the number, the machine goes off. He's screening his call. This is John Chaney of the New York Times. Please leave a message. And he'll beep, beep. Say, hi, John Chaney. This is Kenny Kramer. Larry David, Jerry Seinfeld's friend. I'm returning your phone call. So he starts cracking up. You're returning my phone call. It was a year ago. I said, I'm Cramer. I operate at my own speed.
That's right.
So anyway, he went there and he did the story. And it came out. It was like the front page of the Metro section with my picture above the fold, which is a big deal. I didn't know it at the time, but pictures above the fold. Ooh. And of course, the New York Times has a business where they sell all their stories to anybody who subscribes to them. And so because Seinfeld was an international hit at that time, John Chaney's story about there's a real Kramer and he's starting a tour went international. It appeared in thousands of newspapers all over the world. Well, I had put on like 4 weeks of previews. That sold out like within an hour or two. It was ridiculous. And it was just amazing because, print drives broadcast media. Every tabloid show, every big TV show that did news, it was just amazing, the power of the press.
Yeah.
And so it became a big hit. And I started making a good living. Life was good.
I know also in Kramer style, you were also a correspondent on hard copy, Good Day New York. You also ran as a libertarian for New York City mayor, and you became a non-denominational ordained minister as well. And right, so all of that is Kramer-esque. You want to call it that?
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. The show was off the air by the time this was all happening because Larry could have done a funny episode about Kramer being a minister and marrying a couple.
I so see it, by the way. I so see it.
Yeah, a natural storyline.
So what would you say is next for you?
I don't know. Whatever comes up, we'll see. I don't know. There's one thing about Kramer that's based on me is I don't have much of a work ethic, to be honest with you. My theory is hard work probably won't kill you, but why take a chance?
Love it. I always say you should always have fun when you work, right? So if you're doing that, it's not like you're working. So it's I love that mindset. How could if people want to find out more about you, how would they be able to do that?
Well, I don't know. Just Google Kenny Kramer, and I'm all over the place.
I really, really enjoyed this conversation. Thank you so much, Kenny. Hope you enjoyed this episode of Common Denominator. Join me next week when my guest will be Sandra Fan, the alchemist of human connections. Sandra is one of the most well-known super connectors of people in the country. She'll have expert advice on networking and how to foster meaningful relationships personally and professionally. Until then, have a great week and we'll talk soon.
Thanks for listening to the Common Denominator podcast. Join us next week for another inspiring, impactful, and empowering conversation. To learn more about Moshe, head to MoshePopack.com. If you enjoyed this episode, feel free to share it. And we'd be grateful if you could rate, review, and subscribe to the show.